what just leaked online were about 100,000 emails from Ehud Barak's private email. These emails showed that there was this joint relationship between Jeffrey Epstein, Ehud Barak, and Prince Andrew in the UK. Ehud Barak arranged a secret visit to Epstein's private island without security in 2014.
Why do you think that is?
Mario, can you think of a reason?
I'm hoping that there's something less sinister there. Maybe they're talking about some business. In the emails, they also talked about women.
Virginia Giuffre, for what it's worth, alleged that Ehud Barak had sexually assaulted her.
This is public information. I'm just shocked that this is not all over the news.
Epstein learned the magic of having young, attractive women around as a way to juice deals. But you know, if you go in on a deal with Epstein, you are going to get invited to these parties. You're going to have, again, the opportunity to access things that money can't buy. When you look at the scale of people in Epstein's network, and not a single one has come forward and said, I was blackmailed, someone had to have been keeping tabs in the intelligence sphere.
I highly recommend anyone listening, go back to part 1. It's so worth it because, as I said in my tweet, so I drafted the tweet for the interview, and I said, like, you're just so good at doing this, and I praised you. I sent you a DM. I don't know if you saw it, just praising you at how good you are articulating things and how deep you go into something when you focus on it. And I think people will appreciate that, but also how fact-based you try to be. You know, there's a lot of people that go down those rabbit holes and make all these assumptions. You're like, hey, we know this is a fact. This one is probable, you know, everything adds up, like he's probably working with the intelligence. And this one is like, you know, maybe not. It's just a theory for now. And you always kind of split each point into one of these 3 buckets. So now we're up to, for people that watched part 1, they're watching probably this one right after maybe. We're up to the 90s, Robert Maxwell, probably go back to the Ehud Barak emails that came out and kind of take it from there.
So this is coming out of, you know, as we covered, starting with Epstein at Bear Stearns and then going on his own as this, you know, high net worth / government bounty hunter for hiding assets and retrieving hidden assets. And then that interstitial period in the late 1980s coming into the 90s was Jeffrey Epstein's involvement in what was at the time, I think, the largest Ponzi scheme in American history with the Towers financial collapse. This is 1988, 1989. He links up with Steve Hoffenberger, the head of Towers Financial, and the two of them kind of create this Ponzi scheme together. Only Hoffenberger ends up getting arrested and going down for that for many years in prison. They're introduced to each other through Doug Leese, as you mentioned, previously, the British arms dealer. Also, apparently in that soup was John Mitchell, the former Attorney General of the United States in the late 1960s, who would then himself also be arrested through as for his role in the Watergate scandal. After he stepped down as Attorney General, Mitchell went on to lead the Nixon for re-election campaign and was essentially ahead of the fund that ended up being involved with the plumbers and the Watergate scandal. And so he was actually indicted. And then after he got out of prison, he was went on to be this kind of freelance broker-dealer guy. And so once again, we have these high-level Justice Department connections with Jeffrey Epstein, not just Bill Barr, the Attorney General, but also John Mitchell, the Attorney General. Again, Republican Attorney Generals in both cases. And this is so you can understand the Epstein network coming into the 1990s as being this kind of Nixon, Reagan, Republican Cold War foreign policy network. And then Bill Clinton becomes president in 1992, 1993, takes office. And it's around this time that Jeffrey Epstein meets sort of the new cast of characters post the Towers financial collapse, which again is another case of financial fraud, just like at Bear Stearns. just like with the shady financial dealings with Adnan Khashoggi in the 1980s during Iran-Contra, just like the shady financial dealings with Towers Financial. He then meets Robert Maxwell, Ghislaine Maxwell, and then Leslie Wexner at the same time that a Democrat administration is taking the reins over U.S. foreign policy. And obviously, Robert Maxwell he was a very famous figure for his role in running effectively a British media empire, not just traditional media, but also scientific magazines and journals, controlled very powerful publishing houses. After his death, under mysterious circumstances, where he was essentially found floating after, I think the official story is he fell off his boat or sort of suicided by boat. But after his death, it was effectively revealed that he had very close links with Israeli intelligence. There was a funeral held in Israel where all kind of major Israeli head of state figures, intelligence figures, military figures gave him kind of a very celebrated funeral. And then Epstein would carry on effectively the Maxwell relationship with Ghislaine Maxwell, who is currently in prison and trying to, I think, negotiate a pardon or a commutation of sentence with the U.S. Justice Department. She just sat with Todd Blanche from DOJ for several hours of effectively deposition. It was an interrogation where she disclosed sort of further information about the relationship. It's at this time that Epstein attaches financially to Leslie Wexner. Leslie Wexner was the head of the limited brands, which
I think we talked. Yeah. So just to remind the audience, so Ghislaine Maxwell's, for anyone that doesn't know, it's the one you see in the news all the time. She was his co-conspirator. She got him all these little girls to sleep with him. She also participated. She's the only one arrested right now as part of that entire web. The other two are dead, Jean-Luc and Jeffrey Epstein. And Robert Maxwell, again, what you said, people might have just kind of missed it. There was kind of a whole funeral ceremony in Israel. That was they only do this for like high-level politicians or influential business people that are, Israeli, based in Israel, as far as I understand. But they did it for Robert Maxwell, which kind of reaffirms the theory that he had some sort of relationship with Mossad. And also to remind you, Mike, because people might be watching, so we talked about Leslie Wexner, the relationship there with that, the logistics company, and that relationship that was very, very shady, from the Iran-Contra to kind of bringing that head office to a Leslie Wexner's empire. What was the brand called? The company
you're
that
talking
Leslie
about
Wexner...
the limited
Limited,
brands.
yeah. So we talked about
right.
Yeah, we talked about that one. Just to remind you, we've covered that relationship at the end of the previous part one. So that was, we kind of just finished that one, and we got into Robert Maxwell, which you just introduced us to. And so you're saying Robert Maxwell had a ceremony when he died. He died under mysterious circumstances. Who was the last person? I remember it was something fishy about the last person that saw Robert Maxwell. Do you know who that was? I can't remember. I remember hearing somewhere the last person that saw him was also a questionable person that was related. Also maybe unrelated, maybe a coincidence. I'm not sure if you know this. Blinken's stepfather was Robert Maxwell's closest confidant and the last person to see him before death. Doesn't mean anything. I don't know if there's any dots to connect, but it's just, so Anthony Blinken's stepfather, Samuel Pissar, was Robert Maxwell's closest confidant, lawyer, and the last person to speak to him before his suspicious 1991 death. Not sure, you probably know this. I don't know how deep you go into these
I've seen
things.
that reported as well.
Yeah.
But this is, again, these high-level connections between the U.S. Israeli foreign policy establishment and how Epstein runs through both political aisle sides of that story, from the Republican Ronald Reagan network to the Democrat Tony Blinken, Barack Obama, Bill Clinton network. I brought up the Leslie Wexner side of this because just in this time period in the 1990s, there's a lot more going on there. I think that the aspects that we covered related, primarily to the Southern Air Transport scandal, where the CI proprietary airline was moved directly to Columbus, Ohio, to service the company that Jeffrey Epstein had durable power of attorney over. But Leslie Wexner was also involved in uh, political affairs and U.S. foreign policy. He was a major donor to U.S. universities and to Israeli causes. And it was, by all accounts, how Jeffrey Epstein got the financial largesse that it's unclear the extent to which he had in the 1980s. Famously, you know, uh, the famous place in New York, for example, that Ehud Barak would visit dozens of times, and the largest single residence in New York City that Jeffrey Epstein held, he got through effectively a free transfer from Leslie Wexner. What's interesting as well is that before that, Jeffrey Epstein lived in New York City in a in another very, very large residence that was seized by the US State Department from Iran. And so Jeffrey Epstein had, Mario, I don't know that you and I could arrange something like this. Imagine having the US State Department as your landlord, and your rent payments are going directly to the US State Department because the State Department selected you to live in the residence seized from the government of Iran. And this again gets back to this kind of US, UK, Israeli, Saudi counter Iran operations from the late 70s,
So who
early
so who lived
80s.
who lived there? You think that's the place where Epstein lived?
Yes,
That
everyone
was
can look this
confis-
up.
that was confiscated from Iran by the US State Department?
Yes, yes, and then leased directly to Jeffrey Epstein in Jeffrey Epstein's name. This was reported. Everyone can Google this right now. I believe it was covered by the New York Post, several other outlets in the 1990s. You can just put in Epstein State Department, Iran, New York City residence. And there's a funny story with this as well, because Epstein then got embroiled in a fight and a lawsuit with the U.S. State Department because he violated the terms of the lease agreement by subleasing the property out to two of the major defense attorneys for a for the both the French Connection and Pizza Connection uh, uh, drug drug ring scandals. There was a So the Pizza Connection, the French Connection and Pizza Connection cases involved mafia drug dealing and money laundering through pizza shops in the case of the Pizza Connection scandal from the 1980s, and the French Connection involved the role of France in the processing of drug proceeds. Now, both of these had very strong CIA links to the drug laundering operations. The CIA was using the French heroin processing laboratories since the 1950s, when the CIA was flying. First, it was the War Department, but then later the CIA was flying drug proceeds from the Golden Triangle to processing in France, and then they would be shipped through the Italian mafia out the Mediterranean. This was also part of the struggle. The CIA was highly involved in the union disputes and the docks of Marseille and the like. But these were both very scandalous events in U.S. intelligence and mafia history. And Jeffrey Epstein leased out the State Department property to the defense attorney who was the lawyer for the mob. And this is all happening while Bill Clinton is president, while Epstein is continuing to do his liaison work, in international affairs. It's been reported, I believe, by the New York Post as well, that Jeffrey Epstein visited the Bill Clinton White House at least 17 times. His name appears on White House visitor logs during the Bill Clinton presidency. And who was the prime minister of Israel during Bill Clinton's presidency in the second term? It was none other than Ehud Barak. Ehud Barak, who, as we covered, was the Mr. Israeli military and Israeli military intelligence. Ehud Barak was the head of Amman, Israeli military intelligence, when Jeffrey Epstein first started his career from 1983 to 1985. Ehud Barak was in charge of Israeli military intelligence. He went on to be the Israeli defense secretary, the defense minister, the head of the Israeli military, in addition to Israeli military intelligence. And then went on to be the prime minister of Israel. And so this begs questions about Jeffrey Epstein's potential role in brokering U.S.-Israeli deal-making, development finance, and potentially even covert action during this very thorny period where Israel was having to contend with Yasser Arafat and the the Camp David Accords and the like. And so there are these questions that I think could be answered if there were a full State Department, CIA, potentially even USAID review of U.S.-Israeli development activity. For example, there were these qualified opportunity zones that were being set up to encourage Arab investment in Israeli businesses during the Bill Clinton administration. Some of those businesses included businesses owned by Leslie Wexner. So you would have, for example, a way to qualify for these discounts on tariffs and U.S. economic investment in Arab countries if they had allowed or moved money through various Israeli-owned or blessed companies, for example, in Egypt and in the Horn of Africa. And I have very serious questions as to whether or not, given you had Wexner Industries that were qualified Israeli, were qualified businesses for those opportunity zones, whether Epstein served as a go-between, given that it was his own companies he had durable power of attorney over. Now, again, this is
Wow.
reaching
Okay.
back 30 years.
Yeah, so essentially, so you got Epstein that is leasing a property from the State Department that was confiscated from Iran. He was doing significant business with Leslie Wexner and Robert Maxwell, who are both not only Jewish, but had significant ties with Israel and donated to AIPAC. Leslie donated a lot of money to AIPAC. And then kind of positions, and then he then subleases it to the lawyers of the mafia that was part of that France and pizza
The
scandal
French
back
Connection
then.
and Pizza Connection. And can I add one thing? Because you mentioned Jean-Luc Brunel when you said other co-conspirators had died.
Who was getting him? Who was smuggling those girls to Jeffrey Epstein, from what I understand,
Right.
along
That
with
was the
Ghislaine.
France. It was the France
Oh, he was
side
part
of
of.
this, and
He was
yes,
part of the France
Jean-Luc.
Connection.
Well, he was. Well, he was. I don't know that, but Jean-Luc Brunel was, a very prominent French high society figure, and he also died mysteriously in a prison cell,
Yeah,
just like Jeffrey Epstein did.
ruled as suicide.
Yes.
Like the only
But
three people went to jail. Ghislaine, who's now been transferred to another jail, had a meeting with Trump's former attorney, and a lot of questions there. We'll get there. And Jeffrey Epstein and Jean-Luc Brunel, both of them died by suicide in jail, and there's a lot of questions there. So, okay, so can you tell me more about that? What does that mean about Jeffrey Epstein's position? He seems like a broker between U.S. and Israeli intelligence, from what you've said so far. He's like in the middle, involved in multiple, over the years, multiple different things they've worked on, intelligence sharing, different, projects they've worked on, different operations and missions they've worked on. He was somewhere involved between them all. Is that how you'd see him, like an asset used by all these different intelligence bodies?
yes, and I would include the UK and Saudi Arabia in that as well. These were all now, even though I think that the kind of high level Saudi royals may have had some optics issues with in terms of economic partnerships or investments with Israelis, particularly in the 1990s and early 2000s. There was essentially a shared foreign policy between the U.S., UK, Israel, and Saudi Arabia, and the various issues that pop up in terms of their various foreign policy differences or coalition partner management, for example, to not upset various other Arab partners who may have sided with the Palestinians or Iran or Lebanon or Syrian partners or Egyptian partners. you do need effectively shadow diplomacy in this realm to broker deals, to keep things secret, to move things through shell companies, or have a different beneficial owner on various investments, so that media does not report this as being a backstab by the
Mm.
Saudis or the Israelis or the British or the Americans on various deals. And this appeared to be Jeffrey Epstein's role effectively his whole life, from the 1980s through the 1990s that we're talking about. And it's worth noting that this continued through the 2000s. Jeffrey Epstein's attorneys testified in court that Jeffrey Epstein was part of the founding group of the Clinton Global Initiative, of the Clinton Foundation, as it was being set up when Bill Clinton left office. So you have Bill Clinton and Ehud Barak in Israel, both being president and prime minister at the same time. There, you have this intense flurry of activity in the 1990s around dealing with coalition partner dynamics in the Middle East. Immediately, as soon as Bill Clinton leaves office, as Epstein had met with the Bill Clinton White House 17 times at least during that period while Clinton was president, Jeffrey Epstein then is effectively Bill Clinton's air chauffeur as Bill Clinton does a Africa trip, visiting, I believe, 5 African countries, being flown around personally by Jeffrey Epstein on Jeffrey Epstein's jet. I believe there were other high-profile figures and celebrities who were part of that trip as well. But it's at that time, while Bill Clinton is effectively campaigning on impact investment and the need for development finance to flow into Africa, that Bill Clinton sets up the Clinton Foundation. Jeffrey Epstein, as I mentioned, his lawyers testify in court later that that it was Jeffrey Epstein's idea. He was part of the founding crew that came up with the concept for the Clinton Foundation. And this was also echoed directly by Ghislaine Maxwell in her testimony to the Department of Justice, where she claimed that Jeffrey Epstein helped set up the Clinton Foundation. So you again have, through the Clinton Foundation and the Clinton Global Initiative, you again have these very, very murky foreign investors involved in brokering deals in countries all over the world that effectively serves as a kind of influence and access hub to former President Bill Clinton, his entire network, which carries on its influence to the Democrat Party, Senator then Hillary Clinton, and then later Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, effectively serving as a way to have folks get rich off of investment and development deals in developing countries, while also doing favors that are then owed back in kind by America's highest and most powerful foreign policy and policymakers. So now what's also interesting is what just came out, because it's also important to understand the political dynamics of this. We talked about the Republican side in the 1980s and early 1990s, and then Epstein appears to attach primarily to the Democrat Party apparatus and the Israeli left-wing Labor Party apparatus in the 1990s and 2000s. While Bill Clinton was a Democrat in the U.S., the Democrat Party equivalent in the U.S. in Israel is the Labor Party. Ehud Barak was the prime minister of the Labor Party and is deeply involved in Israeli Labor Party politics. What just leaked online about two and a half weeks ago were about 100,000 emails from Ehud Barak's private email, and this shows email traffic
to 100,000 to a
well,
lot of people.
yeah, yes, it was 100,000 in total, but hundreds of these are to, from, and about Jeffrey Epstein. The Epstein emails begin in around 2007. Now, again, there is an open question as to Epstein's relationship with Ehud Barak before 2007, and I want to make
Yeah,
that
because he could have used a different email address for the other communication,
exactly.
correct?
Yes, exactly. And even in 2007, it appears that they had known each other. His staff is sending him email updates in 2007 about, because at the time, Jeffrey Epstein, 2007 was when Epstein was fighting his first arrest. That is, from 2006 to 2008, Epstein was being prosecuted first by the state of Florida and then by the FBI and Justice Department for his first case for sex trafficking. That was, of course, ended in the sweetheart deal that there was reporting that the
Costa,
right. But Ehud Barak is being updated by his staff about updates in this case, which suggests that there had been an earlier relationship as well. But they collaborate very closely in these emails. I wrote down some of these key findings, and would you mind if I just read from some of these?
No, of course not. Of course not.
So, these emails show that there was this joint relationship between Jeffrey Epstein, Ehud Barak, and Prince Andrew in the UK, which included trying to arrange business deals with wealthy Chinese investors trying to start a security firm in Beijing.
Oh, I didn't expect Prince Andrew to be there.
Right. Well, the UK has been trying to position itself as the international home for Chinese banking. This is part of the restrictions that were lifted with Brexit, interestingly. And this also is, there's been a considerable amount of UK and Chinese banking synergies as but maybe that's a bit of an aside. Ehud Barak arranged a secret visit to Epstein's private island without security in 2014. So this is during Barack Obama's time as president. In January 2014, Ehud Barak arranged to go to Little St. James, but without Shin Bet security. As the former prime minister, Ehud Barak was entitled to what's effectively Secret Service protection for all of his
why
travel.
was it common? Was it common, do you think, for him to go without Shin Bet?
No, it was. Well, Barak emailed Epstein that he was, quote, this direct quote, trying to arrange that the security guys will not come with us to the island. Does this work for you? And he capitalized not. So Ehud Barak is.
Why do you think that is?
Mario, can you think of a reason? I can think of several. But none of them are good.
Do you think it would go as far as? Actually, no. I want you. What is in your mind? Is it they're talking about things that they don't want the Shin Bet to know about, or is it a lot more sinister than that? Going to the island without Shin Bet, and we know what's happened on this island. Is that also possible? I think it's a possibility at least we should bring up. No, why else would you not want Shin Bet?
Right. Why would you not want security to
But
protect
that's
you?
crazy.
So you're traveling to.
That is. I had no idea that he went. I'm just shocked that this is not all over the news. This is a former prime minister of. This is public information. He's saying the former prime minister of Israel, among others. I'm sure we're going to go through others, but the former prime minister of a country went to Epstein's island, and there's emails that are leaked where he clearly said that he's trying to get Shin Bet, the intelligence, to not go with him, the Secret Service to not go with him to the island.
Yes. Well, first, Mario, who's going to report this? Ehud Barak is probably the number one ally within Israel of the Democrat Party. The Democrat Party has an incredible amount of beef with Bibi Netanyahu and the Likud Party. It appeared that they were using U.S. aid funds to fund protests in front of Netanyahu's house and trying to work with the parts of the Israeli Ministry of Justice to try to advance the corruption trial against Netanyahu. Netanyahu was in an explosive war with the U.S. foreign policy establishment under Barack Obama over the Iran deal in 2015. Netanyahu was seen as a Trump ally, and so they're not going to want to embarrass. I don't think the New York Times is going to want to embarrass Ehud Barak or the Washington Post or anyone affiliated with the kind of Biden-Obama.
Is it possible also they didn't want the intelligence to go there because of other reasons? For example, they wanted to talk about things that they don't want to leak, possibly ongoing operations. So let's just hope for the best. Let's hope that is a reason. And what's funny is this is the better of both evils, because anything that's you just don't want a former world leader to be meeting with an intelligence asset to work on what behind the scenes that we cannot know about. But at
Well, the
least
things
it
that
would be a better alternative than the other option.
well, there are two. I mean, there are two. Possibilities that immediately come to mind in terms of potential shady intentions in
Dealings.
doing this. The first is obviously if Ehud Barak would be having romantic relations on
With
the
underage
island,
girls.
uh, or even just any girls that would draw even if they're not underage, if they're considerably younger, or if it gets back that Ehud Barak is involved in this kind of sex tourism that could still bring scandal. And the other, and by the way, these emails do discuss women for not in very particularly explicit terms, but it does appear, and I think we can get to that. But the second is that Ehud Barak may not have trusted his own security. At the time, you have Bibi Netanyahu as the prime minister. You effectively have Likud, um, control over the Shin Bet. It may be that Ehud Barak doesn't necessarily trust that Netanyahu's security guards are going to keep their mouths shut. The Israeli intelligence apparatus is quite significant. I would not be surprised if folks within Israeli intelligence don't necessarily trust, the security officials who are tasked to protect them. If I was Donald Trump, for example, in 2021, under Secret Service protection from Joe Biden's DHS, I'm not sure that I'd trust them either. So to the
Good
extent
point.
that there are other people who are investors in their, because at this time, Ehud Barak and Jeffrey Epstein are business partners, and we'll
Yeah.
get to that. But effectively, what happens here is,
But it is possible.
Ehud,
Just one last thing I want to mention. It is possible they just went to the island to speak about business. So
yes, but
yeah.
what ends up
Who would?
happening,
Yeah. Sorry, I was just trying to see here. Apparently, so there was a lot of reports where he did travel without Shin Bet. Obviously, it's just a quick search right now. On certain travels, relying instead on a personal firearm for self-protection, approved by ministerial committee through the decision spark controversy. Yeah, I'm hoping that there's something less sinister there. Maybe they're talking about some business or some intelligence operation that they didn't want they didn't trust Netanyahu's office to know about it. But you're saying that there's in the emails they also talked about women, not explicitly, but implied women in some ways.
right? Well, I'll get to, so. After he writes, trying to arrange the security guys will not come with us to the island. Does this work for you? Epstein agreed and then personally arranged a helicopter to pick up Barak. But it's worth noting that Virginia Giuffre, for what it's worth, alleged that Ehud Barak had sexually assaulted her, and emails showed that from 2011 in these leaks that Ehud Barak's assistant in 2011 was forwarding news articles about Virginia Giuffre's accusations. Now, Barak has called those false and uncorroborated, but it's worth noting that Barak was one of these figures who was cited by Epstein accusers.
It was Ehud Barak, Prince Andrew. Who else was on the list? Obviously Jeffrey Epstein. Was there anyone else?
Um,
Virginia Giuffre mentioned. And just for the record, just for anyone that doesn't know, Virginia Giuffre died by suicide earlier this year as well.
right.
Call it another
Right.
coincidence. Okay, I didn't know
Right.
that Ehud Barak was mentioned on on the names that she has. So Prince Andrew, Ehud, and obviously Jeffrey.
Right.
And he's
And that
saying,
was
sorry,
actually,
can you go ahead?
yes. And in 2011, those emails were forwarded to by Barak's assistant about Virginia Giuffre's accusations. So you can make of that what you will. Epstein also invited Ehud Barak in these emails to a dinner with Woody Allen in 2016, who was another one of these figures who's been accused of sexual misconduct and.
Who accused
But
Woody Allen? Do you know who accused him? Was it a few
I don't
other
know the
women?
name of the accuser, but this is
Different
you
accusers,
can
not the
just
same. Not
right.
Virginia. It was other accusers.
Right.
Okay.
But also on the list of people invited to this was not just Jeffrey Epstein, Ehud Barak, and Woody Allen, but it was also Ariane de Rothschild, who was the prominent French banker who was the CEO of the Edmond de Rothschild Group. So once again, we have the French connection. We have the Rothschild banking syndicate working alongside a major U.S. filmmaker and kind of culture setter, together with Jeffrey Epstein and the former head of Israeli military intelligence and prime minister of Israel. So again, it shows this kind of banking blobster culture maker soup. Um, and
So just since we got there, can I ask you a question on that island? Get your thoughts, personal thoughts. And I know this is you speculating, and I want you to have room to speculate because you're always so fact based that I now start to wonder, like, what does Mike Benz think? Um, what do you think about those girls on the island? Obviously, there's other perpetrators. We know that. We had the victims just a few days ago say that they're going to make their own list. But do you think those were people that knew they were sleeping with underage girls, um, and they did it anyway because they trusted Epstein? Or do you think they were sleeping with girls that were above the age of 18, but they were obviously younger, and Epstein kind of used that to honeypot them and have something against them as leverage, either for his personal protection or for the intelligence? What are your thoughts?
my personal opinion as of now, and I could be swayed by evidence on either side of this, but my impression is that Epstein learned the magic of having young, attractive women around as a way to juice deals in the 1980s. Adnan Khashoggi was doing the very same thing in the 1980s. Adnan Khashoggi, who we talked about last time, was the world's richest arms dealer. By the way, it's worth noting that just last week it broke that a major Saudi arms dealer who is named in the Epstein files just purchased a string of DC hotels, including the DC Capitol Hilton. So it looks like the Saudi arms dealers are still there's so many of them that Epstein was working with. But in terms of the role of women in this, I don't think that Epstein, and I catch flack for this sometimes. This is not a defense of Epstein. This is simply how I see the arrangement working. I don't think Epstein would have directly tried to have blackmailed anyone in his circle about the women issue. I think that the moment Epstein does that to one person, he loses everyone. Word gets around. Uh, People tell their wives tell their girlfriends. They have to hire crisis PR response teams. Things leak out of there. If 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 Jeffrey Epstein had tried to blackmail Bill Gates or Prince Andrew or one high profile person, and it gets around that you can't trust Epstein to keep his mouth shut about this, and whatever you do on the island, if a tape leaks, that means everybody knows never to go to that island again. You lose the access, you lose the deal flow, you lose the power of the network the moment you corrupt that. Now, that's not to say that
What if
that
what?
could
But
have.
what if he never actually got to the stage where he needs to blackmail someone? What do you think is the possibility that he has all that, but he's never actually used it to his advantage? Or maybe he has back when he had to kind of twist the arm of Alex Acosta when he was being charged by those 40 witnesses. They had 40 witnesses against him. Uh, is that a possibility as well? That because for me it doesn't make sense on like why continue doing it after 2000 whatever 6 or 8 when he almost faced jail time. That's what I don't understand. That's what I don't
Well,
understand. Do you think people voluntarily went there and they knew they're underage girls, or it was just a coincidence, or what?
I think they knew it was a fun party where they've got a great chance to meet young, attractive women. If you are a 65-year-old, very high net worth individual, yeah, you're not going to meet a 20-year-old girl in a bar. You're going to get looked at like you're just another guy, or your clout doesn't speak for you, and you don't. I- I've I've seen this in the kind of this is the sort of thing that's not particularly uncommon for rainmakers and deal makers to that not at the scale that Epstein had. But again, I come back to Adnan Khashoggi, who was this deal maker, broker in the arms trade in the 1980s. And Adnan Khashoggi would show up to parties with 100 to 150 women who he would just essentially pass off on his friends and deal making counterparts. And it was like something extra added to the deal and a reason to be in bed, so to speak,
Oh.
financially with Adnan Khashoggi, because he gives you a currency that money can't buy. There is, you know that you will be able to have a good time. There will be a level of discretion. It will it's a life experience. It's something that
And they
you
wouldn't
don't
and they
want to
wouldn't
lose.
know and they wouldn't know that they're underage. They just know that they're young girls. Is that your opinion? So essentially what you think is
Yes.
that Epstein had young girls because that's his fetish, as disgusting and horrible as it is, he liked to doing that. And then he had those girls there to lure these people in to do the deals to come to the island. But they did not know, in your opinion, they did not know they were underage, or maybe they had a doubt, but they never checked, which is, just like for me, anyone, if you're 16 to sleep with someone, you don't even check their age, that's already, unethical in my eyes. Even if that person's 18, 19, it's already like, come on, you're fucking 60. But putting that aside, it's legal if they're above 18. But what you're saying is that they didn't know that they were under 18, and Epstein did not do it intentionally to blackmail. And that's what you think, but you're still, your mind could change as more evidence comes out.
Something like that. What I'd add is that remember that the age of consent laws are also different in different jurisdictions. You have a lot of these sort of Middle Eastern folks, a lot of these Eastern European investors and the like, and they might not look at a 16 or 17-year-old girl the same way that U.S. laws have. This is a very international enterprise, and you do see the to me, I think of it like girls' juice deals. The fact is a lot of these folks may Epstein may not put in the highest bid or may not have the best terms of the deal, but if you go in on a deal with Epstein, you are going to get invited to these parties. You are not going to be boxed out of it, and you're going to have again the opportunity to access things that money can't buy.
But my,
In
my
that
question
sense.
to you, Mike, is that if he didn't have all the evidence, he has all these powerful people, then why is he protected to this level where he's threatening a split within MAGA? How come he's dead? The guy's dead and still they're not releasing the files.
So
Doesn't that
two
mean
things
there's
on that.
something?
Well, two things on that. So, first, that doesn't mean that other partners that Epstein was a part of didn't have access to, for example, these videotapes or this compromat. For example, if if Epstein was working with the CIA or British intelligence or Israeli intelligence, it's possible that that could have been passed on. But I still don't think that it would have been used in a direct sense because you still, if that tape were shown to someone, for example, by Israeli intelligence, then that person knows that Epstein passed it on to them. But it may have been used to build, for example, a kind of profile sheet or to know what the predilections are. But I've just not, to this day, when you look at the scale of people in Epstein's network, I mean, these are thousands of people over 40 years, and not a single one has come forward and said, I was blackmailed by Jeffrey Epstein, without even saying what the blackmail was. That's a book right there. I mean, that's a deal. That's an exclusive interview. You don't even need to say it was because I was having You could no one's even come
Or they
out
could
and
be
said that.
honest, or they could even say, look, I thought she was 18 and I did it. I regret it. Like, it could have been to that level and maybe gotten maybe some sort of immunity. And also, like, I don't know what
But
the law is. Like, go ahead.
I was going to say, well, yeah, right. What's in terms of statute of limitations and like if
Yeah,
I don't know if
and
that's
also
right,
if
Ron,
they, like,
but
if you know she's 18, like, don't you have to know that she's underage or have checked or something along the lines? Like, I don't know if it's like, if let's say someone's 30 and the girl's 17 or 18. If she's 17, she says she's 18. Is it still illegal if you slept with her thinking she's 18? So it gets a bit murky. But what I'm trying to say is that there could be circumstances, if there's so many people that were involved, that someone does speak out about something. You get someone that says, hey, X, Y, Z happened.
and there was such a market for that. I mean, over the past 7 years, there has been such a thirst to validate people's confirmation biases for someone to come forward and say, I was blackmailed by Jeffrey Epstein. And not a single one in all this time. There have been endless accusations about sexual assault, uh, you know, child sex trafficking, but not a single one about blackmail. And I don't think that's the way Jeffrey Epstein worked primarily. I don't think he was a schmoozer. He was and I'm not saying this as a compliment, but he was by all accounts, a charming, charismatic guy who tried to lean on his likability and the ability to kind of bring you into his orbit and kind of charm. And I don't think that um, I'm just that's not how I see the intelligence links. But you
Interesting.
asked, well, why is he protected in that way? And this is because of the other thing that Epstein did, which was he was a financial broker. He had the network to be able to set up transactions in a way that they were effectively non-traceable, that through various money laundering techniques and international offshore banks and discretion about shielding investors so that they move through shell companies so that these things could be kept discreet. This is the whole. This is what you need in covert action. This is what you need, and for things that are not just intelligence, but intelligence adjacent, or they piggyback on an intelligence operation. I talk a lot in this context about the case of Bruce Rappaport, who I see as being a kind of Jeffrey Epstein figure, or Mark Rich as being who is in my view another one of these Epstein dealmaker type figures. But in the case of Bruce Rappaport, this is right. It's a very adjacent network. Bruce Rappaport was a Swiss banker who was tightly linked with both, well, with Israeli intelligence, but he ended up getting pulled into the U.S. intelligence web when there was a U.S. covert action in Iraq. This was the Iraq Gate scandal towards the end of the Reagan administration in 1988. Once again, involving a scandal with the U.S. Attorney General, Ed Meese. So there's now 3 attorney generals running through this kind of Epstein scandal network. But Bruce Rappaport, in fact, what was happening at the time was Iraq was trying to build a pipeline that would have gone right with Jordan. This is during the tail end of the Iraq-Iran war. Iraq was trying to build a pipeline that would go through Jordan, and it would sidestep Israel, but just barely. So it would be effectively at a time when Israel was having a considerable amount of problems, shall we say, with Saddam Hussein and the regional geopolitical turf war in the Middle East. There were concerns that if Iraq bought this Iraq built this pipeline, that Israel would bomb it, and so investors were skittish. Now, the primary bidder that Iraq wanted to award the contract to was Bechtel, a U.S. Construction and engineering firm who is very, very tightly bound with the CIA. Its founder had CIA covert security clearances and worked very tightly with the CIA during the Cold War. Bechtel operations are frequently supported by the U.S. State Department to ensure that Bechtel wins port and infrastructure and pipeline development deals instead of Russian or Chinese or foreign companies. They are effectively a kind of CIA State Department-backed oil and infrastructure company. Bechtel wanted the deal. Iraq wanted the deal. The U.S. wanted the deal, but they were afraid that Israel would blow the deal up. And so they could not get enough investment capital for Iraq to develop this without Israel giving its blessing. But the problem is Israel did not want to publicly come out and say that they wouldn't attack it. So this had to be back channeled. So what the U.S. government did is they reached out to Bruce Rappaport, who is a Swiss banker who is very close with the Israeli military and diplomatic apparatus. The White House National Security Council tried to get the Development Finance Corporation to put up the money for this so that U.S. taxpayers would be juicing this deal. The Development Finance Corporation, who was not apprised of the covert action with the Israelis, queried the Central Intelligence Agency for its dossier on Bruce Rappaport, because Bruce Rappaport was a very shady Epstein-like character with a lot of negative public press about him.
Was he related to Epstein in any way?
No, but I well, at least I don't have any public evidence of this, but I'm trying to give an impression of the kind of relationship, given that Epstein was involved with these same networks at the same time.
So essentially,
That this
like
was
you're trying to see how he's in the middle of all these different governments and intelligence
Right. You asked why he
bodies.
would have Justice Department protection, and
Yeah.
what I'm trying to say here is the reason. Uh, Rappaport was protected by the CIA against other aspects of the U.S. government. The CIA was sitting on dossiers about Rappaport's various connections to foreign intelligence and his various scandals, but they lied to the Development Finance Corporation, which is a U.S. government agency. It's now run by Leon Black's son, Ben Black. Leon Black gave $15 million. I'm sorry, $150 million to Jeffrey Epstein, and he was the head of Apollo Management. Leon Black was a VIP at Trump's inauguration and a major Republican donor, and his son is now the Development Finance Corporation guy. But at the time, in the 1980s, the Development Finance Corporation said, we don't want to do this deal. The National Security Council said, it's not your job to decide this. We decide national security matters. And so it took a special prosecutor being set up to investigate the Attorney General of the United States, who had a friend who was purportedly in on this deal. And so they claimed that this was only blessed by the Attorney General because his friends were making profits from it. The the special prosecutor then had to crack down on the CIA to get them to turn up Bruce Rappaport's classified information, which again, the CIA lied to the U.S. government and hid it first. And it wasn't until they were under threat of being indicted themselves that they coughed up this information they had on Bruce Rappaport and the Israelis. Now, what Bruce Rappaport did in the background was he secured a secret agreement from the government of Israel not to attack this pipeline in exchange for the government of Israel getting a secret 30% share of the revenue of the pipeline. So that way, this would not be publicly reported.
But Mike, didn't he get immunity from the investigation that's related to the operation that's done on the behalf of the intelligence? Is that how it applies to Rappaport? But with Epstein, he's being investigated for molesting children. It's nothing to do, at least from what I understand, with the intelligence services. Unless you're implying that that could have been part of the intelligence services used the whatever he did with the girls and the other aggressors to film them and be able to have content on them. Like, I'm just trying to see like the immunity of both people, Rappaport and Epstein, whether it's similar or not. Because Rappaport, again, is related to his intelligence operations.
The CIA will lean on the Justice Department to protect figures who are useful to the CIA regardless of their crimes. And I can go through a bunch of examples of this. But let me start by saying we talked about how do we first learn, before Ghislaine Maxwell directly confessed it to the Justice Department this month, how do we first learn about the relationship between Jeffrey Epstein and the Clinton Global Initiative? Well, it was because this was during the plea deal negotiations that Jeffrey Epstein's attorneys offered up to the Justice Department that they should go easy on Epstein because he did philanthropic work with Bill Clinton, with the Clinton Global Foundation, effectively saying he should, even though his case was for effectively trafficking, trafficking prostitutes, he was offering up an evidence.
Children as well.
Yeah, right,
prostitutes,
right,
underage prostitutes, underage girls. Sorry,
right, but he was offering up into evidence the good work that he had done for essentially securing international deal flow for the former president and still high-profile political figure Bill Clinton. But what you see, for example, when the CIA protected Rolando Masfer, a case that we talked about last time, this is in the 1960s. The title of the CIA memo to the National Security Council was something like massive damage to CIA network in event of prosecution of Rolando Masfer. Now, Rolando Masfer was being prosecuted under the Neutrality Act for unauthorized U.S.-born attacks against the island of Haiti to then do another attack against the government of Cuba. But the CIA leaned on the Justice Department not to prosecute him for that crime, because in the course of that prosecution, it would blow up a major CIA asset and also deeply weaken the entire Miami, Cuba CIA network.
What's weird for me is that the immunity deal that Epstein got, it's not about the crimes he's committed, but any future crimes he may commit. And also, doesn't it mention that the identity of anyone else of co-conspirators will also remain private? Are they being indemnified as well?
All co-conspirators, known and unknown. That was the
Yes,
direct
but this
language
is
in the plea deal.
exactly. I thought I had it written down. I couldn't find it, but unsurprisingly, you remember it. But this is more than anything else we've seen before. Why would they protect him from future crimes? And then, as I said, I was speaking to Marjorie Taylor Greene just before this, and she told me that he continued sleeping with underage girls during while he was under arrest, when he could I think he spent the night in jail and could go and spend the rest of the day at home, and I think it was like only spent the night in jail a couple of days a week, I think it was. And in that period he kept sleeping with underage girls. Why was the intelligence okay with this? Why couldn't they say, hey man, cut it off, like we got you out of this one, you fucked up bad, but you can't keep doing this? That's why I think there's more to it than just him being a sick man sleeping with underage girls and not having anything to blackmail all those powerful people, because the immunity deal he got was, at least from what I see, more than anything else I've seen before, unless you've seen crazy ones like that before.
Well, I try to keep my commentary on this in a way that's streamlined to try to get what I think is the most obtainable evidence for this Justice Department and CIA. So, for example, I think that the when you look, we talked about these deals in the 1990s and in the early 2000s and even in the 1980s that Epstein was appeared to be a part of this deal making soup for in various Saudi, Israeli, UK, Clinton related, Ehud Barak related deals. And I believe that if you were to do a CIA name trace and get all traffic, all analyst memos, all intelligence collected, that you would find Epstein in there. I don't know that this would have been sanctioned on the U.S. side in terms of prostitution or underage girls or the like, and I'm just not bullish on finding that in a search. I think that, for example, and I'll give you an example. When the CIA worked with the mafia to try to assassinate um, Castro in Cuba, and they worked with Robert Mayhew and ran this whole operation that stretched from L.A. to Vegas to Miami and Tampa. And this was sanctioned by the CIA to reach out to mafia contacts with Cuban dissidents. But the official, if you read the descriptions that have been declassified on this, they said this is eyes only. We're only keeping 6 physical copies of this, but effectively saying nobody. This is very, very highly sensitive. I think there was a reference to destroying records. I think that when you have these kind of very, very sensitive things around something straight up illegal, like the child, so it's not going to be as well documented as some. Like you do need to have, for money flows, 2 sets of books. The public story and where the money really is, if you're the intelligence side of this, if you are if you're in the financial section of the CIA. And so someone had to have been keeping tabs in the intelligence sphere on the money flows, and that's why I think it's simply a more productive place to look to get an answer to the Epstein story in
But
terms
then,
of his.
but why wouldn't they release the files? Like, why would the DOJ to this day? And a story came out today, and I'm sure you know about it already. The Justice Department just told a federal judge it wants to keep secret the names of 2 Epstein associates who got wired 100K and 350K in 2018 from Epstein. So they're still till now protecting those co-conspirators. Um, Despite the impact it's having on the Trump administration, despite the splits, it's probably the biggest threat Trump is facing right now, more than the war in Gaza when it comes to a support base. That's why, like, why? What am I missing here where it's having the most impact to the most powerful person in the United States?
Well,
It's not like a story that you
there's
can put under the rug and people move on after a week. It's been going on for years and it only gets worse and worse for the president. And not only under Trump, under the former president as well. Like, why didn't anyone release the files and get the credit and get voter support for it?
well, there's two major reasons I see for the Trump White House, which is that Epstein was friends with or did business deals with just a huge number of Trump associates. Now, that doesn't mean that those Trump associates were involved in any sort of prostitution or sex with underage women, but the mere fact of association is a great embarrassment. I mentioned things like Leon Black and the like, but I think I've seen about 10 folks who were in the Trump cabinet or administration who are Trump allies who appear to have pretty significant links to this. Remember, Trump himself bought Adnan Khashoggi's yacht for something like $80 million in the 1980s and flew on Jeffrey Epstein's plane in
Do you,
1993.
do you believe Michael? Do you believe Michael Wolff that there's photos of Trump with girls sitting on his lap? I think that he said
No,
that back in.
I think Michael Wolff is a serial liar, and unless
Okay.
he's going to put up, I think that's a put up or shut up thing. It's very easy to put something like that in the air. If you got him, show him. What's stopping you, buddy? That's a major story. And just given that Michael Wolff lied so egregiously in his book about Russiagate and the first Trump White House, I don't know. That's the sort of thing where you've got to have receipts. But I don't think Trump needed that, frankly. I think Trump is. Now, they were both involved in beauty pageants, both Trump and Epstein. But Trump has been when I talk about 65-year-old, billionaire types who just don't have access to a pipeline of women unless their friends know them. I'm not really talking about Donald Trump, who has been kind of an international playboy, front page gossip column celebrity since his late 20s. And I think that the fact that Trump kicked Epstein out of Mar-a-Lago, that evidently we just learned last week that Trump was an FBI informant,
Yeah,
according to Speaking Like
that was
Johnson.
just came out of nowhere. What do you think when you heard that?
Well, I had known that Trump had been in there was reporting, I think even when Trump was running for office in 2016, that he had at one time been an FBI informant. So was Ronald Reagan as well when he was at the Screen Actors Guild. But I didn't know that it had anything to do with Epstein. I think that those would be very interesting files for the FBI to release.
What about the story by, I think it was Wall Street Journal, about the letters that Trump sent to Epstein? It was a drawing or something with a comment about girls and enigmas or something along those lines. Do you remember the comment?
Yes. It was. Have you ever noticed that enigmas never age?
Yeah, exactly. What was your reaction to that?
I don't know what to make of it. It's one of these things where I don't even really, I don't care about it because we know that Trump and Epstein had this pre-1995 relationship, given the flight logs that have been public for several years now.
And I think it was common knowledge that Epstein slept with younger girls. I think no one knew or thought they were underage girls, at least not until the Acosta plea deal. But before that, I think it was well known. I think didn't people at Epstein's Island call his plane, his private jet, the Lolita Express? It wasn't Epstein that gave it that name. It was people at the island because they always saw girls come in and out of that plane. So I think people knew that Epstein liked to hang out with younger girls, kind of Hugh Hefner type.
I believe that's the case, but there is some of this, by the way, in the Epstein Ehud Barak emails. If I can read a little bit more from that.
Yeah, please, please.
So after Barak thanked Epstein for his, quote, great, impressive island, Epstein forwarded Ehud Barak a 2016 email about a young woman at his mansion. In March 2016, Epstein sent Barak a forwarded email chain between his attorneys, Alan Dershowitz and Roy Black, and a New York Post columnist discussing Epstein's continued debauchery. So Epstein is sending Barak a New York Post article that described Epstein's house full of young women, despite the 2008 conviction. And in the email, Epstein said to Barak, quote, guess who is in the fur hat? And he attached a photo to the email that appeared to be a known European fixer of young models, who was the picture was this fixer of young models outside of Epstein's townhouse. Now, Ehud Barak did not reply to that email, but it clearly showed Epstein and that Ehud Barak knew this European fixer of young women for parties. And by the way, this doesn't necessarily mean they were underage. I've been to Hollywood parties where it's a party that influencers are throwing, and they have
Very
like
common.
they because it's going to be 80% men, and successful men want to be at a party where there's attractive women. There will be a guy you can describe as a fixer, effectively, who just DMs local LA, attractive women on Instagram and gets paid a fee for getting 50 attractive girls to a party. So again, this doesn't mean this is illegal. I'm simply noting that Ehud Barak was clearly aware of this phenomenon of yeah. But there are
You go ahead.
a few other things. There are a few other things that I think help flesh out the things we were talking about from these
Please.
emails.
Please. Yeah, I want you to go through these emails because that was pretty. I know you just went through them before this interview.
Yeah, and I haven't seen this widely reported really, so I just want to make sure I get this out while we're speaking together. But so chose Ehud Barak accepted $1 million from Jeffrey Epstein for a venture in 2015. This was a limited partnership for a tech startup. So that's again Jeffrey Epstein, directly with the former head of Israeli military intelligence, the former head of the Israeli Defense Department, and the former Prime Minister of Israel. In 2013, the UK power broker Peter Mandelson sought Epstein's help vetting an Israeli contact. So this is a 2013 email that lured Peter Mandelson, who is a former British cabinet minister and lobbyist and is now, I believe, the UK ambassador to the US, emailed Jeffrey Epstein asking for a favor. He wanted Epstein to ask Ehud Barak about an Israeli political consultant living in London who had claimed to have worked on Ehud Barak's political campaigns. Mandelson even signed off with this title at the time, Chairman of Global Council. And Epstein then forwarded that request to Ehud Barak, acting as the go-between. And this was 5 years after Epstein's 2008 conviction. So you have a British cabinet minister and lobbyist who is now the UK ambassador to the US trying to get information from Ehud Barak and using Jeffrey Epstein as the go-between. So this is a British power broker trying to speak to an Israeli power broker and using Jeffrey Epstein as the power broker of power brokers, effectively the middleman between power brokers. And there are a few other things that I think are very important that I caught in this. Obviously, there's a lot on the joint investments with Carbine 911 and trying to secure investments for that, and actually getting applying for U.S. government contracts with the Department of Homeland Security to get Ehud Barak's and Jeffrey Epstein's joint venture, effectively Carbine 911, to get U.S. government DHS contracts, which is insane levels of what you don't want 101, to the extent that there was blackmail or surveillance that was done with Jeffrey Epstein, to have the U.S. government effectively using Epstein's surveillance technology for everyone. The moment you pass through airport security or get your eyeballs scanned, it's not just whether you went to the island, it's whether you've taken a domestic flight, is troubling enough. But this also involved other high-level Israeli military folks. So Epstein's role in the startup was concealed by Ehud Barak. One of the co-founders of the venture was Pinchas Bucharest, who was a retired IDF general, and who said Barak brought the money. As far as I'm concerned, it's his. Saying, I don't know Epstein, and trying to kind of make Epstein a silent partner.
Is that the one related to Peter Thiel?
Yeah. Yes. This was the well, this was related to the yes, this was, I believe, related to the Carbine. This is related, I believe, to the Carbine investment. It's also worth noting that Pinchas Buchrist was he was also the head of Unit 8200, for what it's worth.
Um,
But I don't know that this. I don't, because the Peter Thiel side of this comes with I think it was Valar Ventures, which I believe is actually the Jeffrey Epstein estate's largest holdings. So this came out, I believe it was the Daily Beast or a similar outlet reported this about 2 months ago, that as they are administering the Jeffrey Epstein estate, I believe the single largest holding was Epstein's investment, which I think is worth something like $400 million in the estate now, because it had gone up so much from a Teal Link venture fund, Valar Ventures. But
um,
there's just one last thing on this. I just feel like I
yeah,
have to
please,
get
yeah,
out, because
please, yes, go ahead.
which is we covered last time how in the Iran Contra scandal, where Jeffrey Epstein was, by his own account, concealing money for Adnan Khashoggi, while the CIA and the U.S. National Security Council were using Adnan Khashoggi as the middleman for covert action where the money had to be concealed. This appeared to be what Epstein was doing, not just in the 1980s, but in the 2015s. So after the 2014 Crimea affair and the entire eastern side of Ukraine broke away from the post-coup government after the CIA and US aid and the UK Foreign Office and British intelligence all helped overthrow the democratically elected Ukrainian government in 2014 in the Maidan Revolution. The US and UK diplomats led a sanctions crusade so that European countries and countries around the world would pass sanctions against Vladimir Putin and the Putin inner circle in Russia as punishment for their support for Crimea and eastern Ukraine. This is started in mid 2014. In April 2015, Jeffrey Epstein, in these emails, is using Ehud Barak to connect with Russian officials. So Epstein had Ehud Barak meet Sergei Belyakov, Russia's former deputy minister of economic development. So we're once again back to this Clinton Foundation USAID style economic development, who then invited Ehud Barak to the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, which is sort of like Russia's Davos. And Epstein, in these emails, advised that this was a chance to reach Putin's advisors. And he explicitly asked Ehud Barak to tell Putin's inner circle that, quote, Jeffrey could advise on markets and the financial system, emphasizing he was not, quote, not political, and that Epstein was pitching himself as an economic guru to Moscow's inner circle and offering advice on how to evade U.S. sanctions against Russia. So at the time, the U.S.
Where'd you get that information? Sorry, where'd you get that information from?
Well, this is in this April 15 email series, and I can post all these.
How is that? That is crazy. So this is an American citizen. I don't know what relationship he has to do with all these different intelligence services, including potentially the US, is now offering Russia the ability to evade US sanctions.
Well, it appears that he's offering the Israelis the ability to evade U.S. sanctions on Russia. But now remember, there was a lot of trade and business between the U.S. and Russia before 2014. This was Hillary Clinton herself was involved in Uranium One and getting money from from the mayor of the mayor of Moscow involved with the Bidens and whatnot. If you remember, Barack Obama was pushed by Mitt Romney from the right for being soft on Russia. This was this famous 2012 debate where Mitt Romney accused Obama of being soft on Putin, and Putin said the 1980s called, they want their foreign policy back. And then Barack Obama was caught on hot mic telling Medvedev, quote, tell Vladimir I'll have more flexibility after the election, because they wanted to do these economic deals with Russia, but did not want the political blowback from appearing in public to be seen doing deals with Russia. And meanwhile, but that changed after 2014 when the Democrat stakeholders like George Soros were hit by the counter coup, effectively the Russia-backed Crimea and Donbass breakaways, and so it created this hot potato. There were still billions of dollars to be made in deals from Russian oil, Russian gas, Russian rare earth minerals, Russian titanium and steel and uranium, and but there were these sanctions in place, just like there were sanctions on Iran in the 1980s with
Exactly.
the arms embargo against Iran. And just as Epstein was, his main client was the guy evading those sanctions on Iran, it appears he was doing the same thing with respect to sanctions on Russia after Crimea in 2015, 2016.
Mike, the last question, and probably the hardest one for today, is then you told me about the underage girls and whether Epstein would use them as a way to blackmail all these different people, powerful people, whether him personally to protect himself or have more leverage or on behalf of intelligence. My next question to you is then, why kill him? Like, if the intelligence is meant to protect him, how, William Barr was the last person, Trump's attorney general, to visit Epstein before his death. There's still a cover up to this day on how he died. Why kill him?
Oh my
First, I'm
God.
sure
I mean,
you obviously you don't think he killed himself. So assuming that, why?
I can think of 3 dozen reasons off the top of my head. Every one of these, transactions, if you were to be, as what he would argue in the course of a trial is that it's not his fault. He was working. This happens all the time in informant trials where um, their defense will be, this was authorized. This is not a crime. This was an authorized crime. This was authorized by the U.S. State Department, by U.S. intelligence agencies. Here's the name of my case handler. Here's the name of my contacts. Here's my saved uh, uh, audio recordings of my discussions with U.S. government officials or Israeli government officials or Saudi government officials or British government officials. There's probably about a dozen governments, including our
So,
own, who would want to do everything in their power to stop that testimony from becoming public, because it then creates a massive scandal within those countries. It creates an international incident in terms of covert action and foreign meddling. I mean, the amount of the sheer number of high level people who could be thrown under the bus in the course of Jeffrey Epstein making his own defense could change the course of world politics.
so essentially, he'd make the argument that these intelligence services, which includes the U.S., obviously, because he's under U.S. jurisdiction, he's being in charge in the U.S., facilitated child trafficking for whatever reason to allow him to perform all these different things on their behalf, to facilitate all these deals on their behalf. So he'd
I'm
try to move the blame to them, and that would lead to a crisis within those institutions.
I don't know that it would even. I don't think that would be it would be something adjacent to that, in the sense that, for example, he could make the argument that, his arrangement of, women to the island was in furtherance of um, making deals for investment in some region where the U.S. State Department or Israeli Foreign Ministry or was or Saudis or Brits were doing some geopolitically sensitive action, that this was a part of, this was in the course of business, and that they knew it was happening. And but it doesn't mean that he would say the CIA told me to traffic underage women, but
Not
wouldn't
told me to
need
try,
to.
but like kind of facilitated or allowed me to do it for their own benefit, so I could do those deals on their behalf. It's like they knew I'm trafficking those women. They allowed me to get indemnity back in 2008. They allowed me to walk free to continue doing their dirty work, and then it would just paint the CIA, Saudi intelligence, Israeli intelligence, French intelligence, whatever, whoever else is involved, and all these different institutions in a
Well, I'll
very
give you an
bad way that could lead
example.
to a crisis.
I'll give you an example from the 1980s and 1990s. What came out in Gary Webb's reporting about the CIA's drug trafficking for Iran Contra, which, again, as we talked about, Epstein appeared to have just tremendous links to through various career and and clientele angles. But during Iran Contra, the CIA was relying in terms of the processing, transportation, and sale of narcotics to various drug dealers in Colombia, Nicaragua, Miami, Arkansas, Los Angeles. And in multiple times over the course of that, as Gary Webb documented, the CIA leaned on the Justice Department to not go after many of these drug dealers for drug dealing. Now, that doesn't mean that the CIA told these drug dealers to deal the drugs, but if it were simply allowed, if these drug dealers were had the ability to expose or embarrass government knowledge of it happening, it would be a major scandal. And so you saw the CIA working with the Justice Department to limit the witness list, to petition the judge to avoid various lines of questioning, and to not prosecute various individuals associated with it in order to protect that enterprise. That doesn't mean the CIA told them to do it. What it meant was they were doing it. The CIA knew they were doing it, but did not stop it or did not recommend prosecution or have the FBI come and raid any of it, because even though that was not all the CIA wanted in that case was money for the Contras. They didn't care where it came from. They didn't care whether it came from black market diamonds. They didn't care if it came from skim, from an illegal weapons sale to Iran. They didn't care if it came from drugs in Bolivia or Peru or Colombia. All they cared about was the overriding directive for the mission, which was to have the Nicaraguan Contras win, which required money. And it's the same thing with this kind of covert action when you're talking about the need
turning a
for money.
blind eye on child trafficking.
If that's what it took, to get $100 million invested in some State Department, desired CIA directed covert action, then they don't care where the money comes from. Is that what gets them promotions, what gets them their foreign policy wins, what gets them their sinecure at the Carnegie Endowment or the Atlantic Council or the Harvard University when their time is done, is whether or not they were good to these stakeholders while in office. And that means they win the mission, the people get the money. And so, but if to the extent that they don't want it coming out what they knew, they want to present the sausage. They don't want it to be publicly revealed how the sausage was made. And so, if a chef threatens to disclose what the secret ingredients are in the sausage, you don't want that chef alive at trial so that he can tell the jury and the American people and the international community the secret ingredients.
That's a good way of putting it. Mike, we've covered pretty much, we've skipped a few things, but we've covered most of the stories. There's a few more investments and kind of shady relationships that he's had. I think the final part of the discussion for when we have it, and I think there's no rush to this one because there's developments as we're speaking, is that all the different cover-ups that we've seen. So whether it's that missing 3 minutes, I'm sure you've looked into all of it, that missing 3 minutes that later came out, and there's nothing showing there. Apparently it's been tampered with. Why the files are still not being released. Cause of death. There's various things that point that it wasn't suicide. And there's a lot of questions there, and more importantly, on why a cover-up is there. We kind of touched on it today. We'll probably do this one later on because we're seeing more things come out now as more and more pressure builds on the Trump administration. Do you think they will release the files? Last question, and we keep it very, very quick though. Is there a risk, and I asked Congressman Rocano this as well, and I didn't ask anyone else that question, just Congressman Khanna, is the risk of everyone wants the Twitter files to be released. What do you think is the possibility? Is it possible for those intelligence services that could kill him in jail, that could protect all these different co-conspirators, couldn't they just destroy the files, or is that a lot more difficult than one would assume? Because or tamper with the files,
they could get corrupted. It's quite possible that files were not digitized. I've spoken with folks, inside the U.S. government around this investigation who say that there are a tremendous number of files that have not been disclosed on this. But so it could be non-disclosure. It also could be corrupting. I mean, this is, the way this would work is they take the originals. They can use a third-party contractor to do document management. The third-party contractor they use for document management can say, "Oh, we had an error in our system. The files got corrupted, and because we took the originals, now you don't have them anymore." There's lots of ways to kill evidence, and both the CIA and FBI have a long and lurid history of this. As I mentioned, this was even in the JFK files. We saw
Yeah.
references to delete paper records of this. Um, and I would not be surprised if during Jeffrey Epstein's first prosecution, that sort of action was taken. But even so, that's not a reason not to pursue it. I mean, we've, like I mentioned, Pam Bondi has never stood in front of a podium and told us whether or not she even asked the CIA to run a name trace, just a simple name trace, which is done ordinary course. Anytime the media has a public accusation that a high profile figure has intelligence links, they want to know for their own knowledge whether or not the reporting is true. And so there's no way that hasn't been done. But Pam Bondi has not even told us whether she requested it or has seen the results of it, or her team is reviewing it, or how much of that will be declassified. And to me, that's
Mike,
because they don't want us to know, or they don't want to know, because then they would have to tell us.
oh, that's actually interesting as well. Mike, absolute pleasure, as always said. I just love your comprehensive knowledge when you focus on a topic, and this is no exception. Appreciate it, man. We'll be speaking again. Thank you.
Thank you, Mario.